Hello and welcome to our YouTube channel. Today we're here to talk about Albert Camus. Before we dive into the main content, we're delighted to have you here. If this is your first time on our channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button to stay updated with our latest uploads. Also, feel free to leave your comments to motivate us to provide better content. So, without further ado, let's get into today's topic. The news is strange, and certainly no one expected to hear after more than half a century that the accident leading to the death of Albert Camus was an orchestrated event designed by the KGB, with the French government not entirely displeased to see such an occurrence happen and benefit from the death of their writer. But now, a new book has been published in Europe that creates a conspiracy theory and puts it forward. The new book claims that Albert Camus was assassinated by the KGB, and the car accident involving Gallimard and Camus was entirely premeditated. These investigations are based on archived findings and also claims by some literary figures and discovered memoirs, indicating that France may have had a hand in the accident in 1960 that resulted in the death of this writer. 60 years after Albert Camus, the French Nobel Prize winner in literature, died at the age of 46 in a car accident, a new book has been published arguing that he was assassinated in retaliation for his anti-Soviet stance by KGB spies. Who doubted it? The suspicion falls on an Italian writer. Giovanni Catelli first published his theory in 2011, reporting in the famous newspaper Corriere della Sera that he had found statements in the memoirs of the famous Czech poet and translator James Brana, indicating that Camus' death was not an accident. Now Giovanni Catelli has expanded his research in a book titled Death of Camus and brought forth new arguments. But what was the story 8 years ago? The new theory claimed that the car accident that killed the French literary giant in 1960 was no accident. When Albert Camus, the French philosopher, writer, and intellectual, died in a car accident just 2 years after winning the Nobel Prize in Literature, it seemed like a nearly bizarre tragedy. In Camus' pocket was an unused train ticket from his home to Paris. The 46-year-old writer intended to travel with his wife and their teenage twins, Catherine and Jean, after the Christmas holidays. Instead, his friend and publisher, Michel Gallimard, suggested that he drive. Camus was immediately killed. Gallimard also died a few days later. Police found the train ticket and 144 pages of handwritten notes belonging to a man named Monsieur X. An unfinished novel based on Camus' childhood in Algeria, which he himself had predicted would be his best work. The tragedy shocked and saddened France, but no one imagined that this accident could be anything other than an accident. 8 years ago, the Italian newspaper Corriere della Sera announced that Soviet Union spies were likely behind this accident. This theory is derived from the statements of Giovanni Catelli, an Italian writer and poet, who said, in a memoir belonging to James Brana, a famous Czech poet and translator, "I found some strange things written." In a paragraph, he writes, "I heard very strange things from someone who knew a lot and had very informed sources." According to him, the incident that took Albert Camus' life in 1960 was orchestrated by the Soviets. They caused a puncture in the wheel using an advanced piece of equipment and damaged Camus' car tire. Some consider this event as an order personally issued by Dmitry Shepilov, the Soviet Union's Minister of Foreign Affairs, in response to an article published in the French magazine Franco-Tire in March 1957. An article in which Camus attacked Shepilov and explicitly named him. In his notes, Camus condemned Shepilov's massacres as Moscow's decision to send forces to suppress the Hungarian uprising in 1956. A year later, Camus officially supported Boris Pasternak, the Russian Nobel Prize-winning writer and author of Dr. Zhivago, a work that Stalin had banned in the Soviet Union. Corriere della Sera concludes that there are sufficient reasons for Moscow and Camus' assassination by the usual agents of the KGB. The foreign writer, the plague, and the myth of Sisyphus were buried in the Lormarin Cemetery near the coast of Azure, and he is still considered a popular figure and an intellectual. Several years ago, Sarkozy, the former French president, tried to transfer his remains to the Pantheon, which failed. But this hypothesis also has its opponents. Olivier Todd, a former BBC correspondent in Paris who has also written a book about the life of Albert Camus, told Observer that during his research in the archives of the Soviet Union, he found nothing to suggest that this was orchestrated by Moscow. My initial reaction is that I'm not surprised by KGB's activities, but you have to ask yourself who benefits from this event and why. This news is interesting and entertaining, and it's certainly true that KGB documents are full of reports on how Soviets used Czechs to carry out their dirty work. But there's nothing in KGB about this. To me, this story doesn't seem right. Albert Camus died on January 4, 1960. When his publisher, Michel Gallimard, lost control of his car and crashed into a tree. The writer was immediately killed, and Gallimard died a few days later. 3 years before that incident, Camus won the Nobel Prize in Literature for addressing human conscience issues in our era. It seemed that this accident occurred due to an explosion or something falling. Experts were surprised by the occurrence of this event on a long and quiet 30-foot road at that time. Herbert Lotman wrote about this piece in Camus' biography in 1978. Catilli believes that part of Zbrana's memoirs explains why this hypothesis is correct. This poet wrote in late summer 1980 that an informed man had told him that KGB was responsible. They adjusted the tires using a device that punctured them when the car was moving at high speed. He said this order was issued by Dmitry Shepilov, the Soviet Union's Minister of Foreign Affairs, in retaliation for an article by Camus in the French newspaper Tire published in March 1957. Zbrana's memoir reports, it seems that it took 3 years to carry out this mission. They finally proceeded in a way that everyone still thinks Camus died due to a usual accident. This man informed me from his reliable source and claimed that his sources were completely reliable. Evidence shows that the main issue is Camus' stance on the Hungarian uprising and its suppression, as well as the French writer's support for Boris Pasternak. Italian Catilli has spent years researching the credibility of Zbrana's words. He interviews Zbrana's wife in his book Death of Camus. He also investigates KGB's influence in France. After the publication of this book in Italy, Catilli receives calls claiming to have information about the suspicious death of Camus. One of them says, someone said he was present at the scene of the accident. It seems to me that person knew more than what was available to me. But I refrained from asking questions myself. Another person, an old journalist, told Catilli, I didn't investigate at the time, but I still remember how some of Camus' close associates were convinced that the incident was staged by KGB. Catilli argues that Camus' explicit statements on French-Soviet relations had an impact, and Camus' prominent personality served as a reminder of Soviet atrocities to the French people.